Hi there, how are you? Oh, hi.
Yeah, you bet. What do I gotta do? I gotta get a phone.
Wonder if everyone could have a seat. We're going to start in about 15 seconds. Thank you.
Right.
Shame to lose one. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Bloomington City Council Committee of the Whole to order, please. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Lauer,
Here.
Alderman Sage,
Here.
Alderman Malomboy,
Here.
Alderman Burgess,
Here.
Alderman Painter,
Here.
Alderman Schmidt,
Here.
Alderman Black,
Here.
Alderman Hallman,
Here.
Alderman Fruin, Mayor Renner.
Here, thank you very much. And at this point, actually, I understand that there is a motion. Alderman Black, did you have a motion that you were going to?
Yes, I wanted to move the public comment until after the presentations and after the city council discussion.
Okay, and then that was consistent with what we did
Yeah.
last, to the proposal that we did not accept last June.
Mostly because we're considering a topic here and we want to get the facts on the table. There's no decision being made this evening.
Right, yeah, just so that everybody's clear, there's no decision made this evening. This is information and opportunity for public comment. And when we had the proposal last June that the council decided not to pursue, we had public comment at the end so that we could get the information on the table before we heard people's opinions. So is there a second to that motion?
I'll second, Mayor.
Second by Alderwoman Schmidt. We can do this by voice vote. I'm
I'd
sorry,
like to
Alderman.
comment first.
Pardon me?
I would really like to see the ability to have a choice, either before or after. I mean, this is the public's seats,
Right.
and they should be calling the shots here. So
Either
Thank you.
before, I didn't quite understand.
I would
Kevin.
like to have a public comment. If you're going to move it to after, I would like to have them have the ability to speak prior if they would like to.
To speak, I'm sorry.
Prior to...
Oh, I see. If they prefer, I see. Okay. All right. Any other comment on this? So, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll then on that? For the motion to put public comment to the end, or do you want to just do it by... We- Electronically, okay, all right. Okay, if everyone, I think... Oh, I'm sorry. The motion carries 7-1. Madam Clerk, would you announce the nay?
Alderman Lauer.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, now we move right along then to consideration of approving the Committee of the Whole minutes of January 19th, 2016. Is there a motion to approve the minutes, or are there amendments, changes?
So moved.
Moved by Alderwoman Howman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Painter. Any discussion, corrections? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Let the record show that the minutes were approved unanimously as presented. And of course, again, we're here this evening, and just to clarify that there are no decisions to be made. This would be a very long process. Those of you who may have been involved in other communities or seen what has happened over time in economic development projects in Uptown Normal or other places, this is the first of many of these. And actually, I do want to use the mayor's prerogative for just 1 second to recognize a special guest in the audience, and that's former Mayor Jesse Smart. Jesse, thank you so much for coming. Mayor Smart was on the city council, was mayor for 12 years, and we're very happy that he's here, because obviously he's still concerned about his community to make sure that his city continues to thrive. Thank you. And again, essentially one of the things that we know is one of the core functions of government is to grow the local economy and to create jobs and to try to leverage your assets as much as possible. And that's what we're attempting to do here, is essentially expand the pie. We know we've have many projects and successes with Hy-Vee and Dick's and Green Top Grocery and many others. So throughout our community, whether they're underperforming areas, we're attempting to move forward, because Bloomington has lots of assets that we do continue to need to leverage. One of the underperforming areas is certainly downtown. Virtually every metro city in the United States, in fact, I've yet to meet a mayor in the U.S. Conference of Mayors or anywhere who's not at some point in the process of revitalizing their downtown. They're either much further along than we are, they're a little further than we are, they're at our point, or they're even behind where we are, or they've got much more serious challenges than we do here in Bloomington. Certainly, one of the critical things that we know is that investors look in downtowns, even if they're not investing in downtown. They drive and they take a look at the downtown to see what the condition is. There are not cities that are thriving that allow their downtowns to languish. And as we go forward in the future, we do know that urban growth in the future, as virtually everyone talks about throughout the United States, the action is in downtowns and older neighborhoods and revitalization. So one of the things that we know, we've said before, we discussed a specific set of proposals last June. Those we decided, the council, that we were not going to pursue. We have a very different set of proposals here. We have to protect the city, and we have to protect in terms of writing our contracts, we've got to protect our historic buildings. And we have to be fiscally responsible. And the proposals that we have here have been vetted from an outside group, consultant, and they are people who've been in business for over 35 years. Actually, Mr. Friedman has written articles 3.5 decades ago for the International City County Management Association, a worthy organization, I might say. And so we're very happy to have you here to kind of vet some of these proposals for us. And as we have seen, they have confirmed, as we go through the details of this, that of the budget that will be presented next week by the city manager, there are millions and millions of dollars for infrastructure and streets and other improvements. There is no money in our current budget from our current revenues for downtown revitalization. That's what we're talking about. The incentives that we would create would be but for incentives, but for the private investment, but for the 40-some million dollars of private investment, we would not have hotel motel taxes. We would still have a block that is underperforming, to put it charitably, and the largest fire hazard in our downtown. If we can change that to an engine of economic growth, we don't have to look very far. We can look to Uptown Normal. A little over 10 years ago, it was an EPA Superfund waste site. There were abandoned buildings. There were vacant lots. And now it is a destination. And that's what Bloomington can be, and that's what we can do for the future. And that's all I'm going to say, believe it or not. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to, I think Mr. Gablehausen is going to go first, and then Mr. Friedman, and then we will have council discussion, and then public comment once all of the information is on the table. Thank you. Mr. Gablehausen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Everyone in the audience, I apologize for having my back to you. I never like to do that. You know, tonight can be a really exciting night. It is because we get the opportunity to take another step forward to doing something, to quote Mr. Friedman's group, pioneering, but perhaps transformative for our downtown. When we look at this, we all know that the downtown benefits if we create a place for people to come and spend the night. If we increase the number of visitors to our downtown, our businesses downtown benefit from more customers, more potential clients. If we add amenities to the downtown, we have a better opportunity to continue to grow the residential base in the downtown area. But we shouldn't view this as a project that only benefits the downtown. I mean, I'm a firm believer that this project goes far beyond the borders of downtown and has a significant impact to the entire city of Bloomington. First off, we're creating jobs. We're creating permanent jobs. We're creating temporary jobs. Those jobs, many of them will come to the residents. We expand the city's tax base, as the mayor alluded to, not just in terms of future, property taxes, but sales taxes, hotel motel taxes. The people that come and stay in a hotel all of a sudden shop at the corner grocery store. They stop at the gas station. They go out to the new Dick's, and get those replacement sneakers that somebody forgot when they were at a tournament, at Wesleyan. Those things all happen. It benefits the entire community.
Thanks for that plug for Wesleyan.
No problem. And I will make my plug for my son Cody, who's here with me tonight, who's a freshman at Wesleyan. Cody, give your hand. Okay. Thank you. Okay. This is about much more than a downtown hotel. But I want to step back for a second and think about the meeting I was at last week in this chambers. Cody and I happened to stand in the back and listen to the TIF hearing regarding Colonial Plaza. And that made me just kind of look at some of the commonalities between what we're talking about here and what you're doing there on Colonial Plaza. You passed an inducement resolution back in August on that project that Austin was nice enough to send me over because Mr. Friedman talked about inducement resolutions, and quite frankly, I wanted to read one because it's not a term I was that familiar with. And I saw where that inducement resolution was passed 9-0 by the council. That inducement resolution talked about revenue sharing on that project. It recognized that to be able to bring about what was going to occur there was going to have to be some funneling of some of the revenues created back into that project. I heard heard Austin talk a little bit about the problems of a blighted, empty center and how that can have a contagious effect on crime and other things in the neighborhood. That's probably enough on the similarities of that project to this one. But we are going to hear and discuss many of those same things. Tonight we're talking about revenue sharing. Mr. Friedman will talk about that a lot. But again, we're not talking about taking one nickel from the city's current revenue stream. And that can't be emphasized enough. We're talking about future revenues and any sharing. We know these sites are heavily vacant. We also know that they have an impact regarding blight in the area. and then that's something that clearly has to be resurrected. It clearly has an impact on the Coliseum. You know, if somebody's looking at, do we have an event there, and the neighborhood's not as strong, you know, that does have an impact. Just in terms of magnitude, I do want to just one last closing comment regarding the Colonial Plaza, this project comparison. Colonial Plaza, you did about a $4 million inducement package on a $20 million project. Here we're talking about a $50 million project. Mathematically, we're in the range of a $12 million project. Ironically, proportionally, they're almost identical. So that's pretty interesting. Unfortunately, for some reason, whenever somebody says downtown, it seems to bring about more consternation, more concern, more choruses of boos. Maybe it's because of some negative history associated with the Coliseum. Maybe it has to do with other issues. I don't know. But I'm really hopeful in this process we can view this project on its own merits and not, you know, be dragged down with some, you know, negative that people think downtown's dead. I'm tired of hearing that. As an outsider, I'm tired of hearing that. You've got a lot of wonderful things happening in your downtown. You've made tremendous inroads. I just left a meeting a few minutes ago at the History Museum. I mean, what a fabulous project. What a fabulous project. This can't do anything but make that better. And that's going to do nothing but make this better. And that's what a community looking to the future really recognizes. One of the things that I'm very concerned about is my ability and our project's ability to address factually comments and concerns that people raise. If somebody asks a legitimate question, we want the opportunity to answer that. To that end, I commissioned, I think some people wonder where this website came from, I paid for it. So if you've seen a website, webelieveinbloomington.com, I asked for that to be developed. I reached out to a downtown Bloomington business owner. I said, do you have somebody that can help me with the website? He introduced me to somebody, and that kind of led to, you know, me initiating this website. Why? Because we want to make sure that accurate, complete information is out there. People want to ask questions, we're going to do our best to answer those questions. We were the first ones, we posted Mr. Friedman's report on there. I did a memo last night to the council members. That memo will be out there. I mean, anything that we have, we want to be out there because we want all of you, if you get asked a question while you're on your way to church or you're at the grocery store or some civic function and somebody says, I don't understand, we want you to say, you know what, here's the source of info. So if you ever find that what we say on that isn't accurate, call us out on it. Call us out on it. You know, the fact check they do sometimes on TV. Call us out on it because we are going to be 100% accurate. I've also reached out, did a couple of radio interviews in the last couple of days. Again, transparency. We want this info out there. I do want to make sure, though, it's very clear that you understand that as we say we want nothing from existing city revenues, we mean that. We have to figure out how to structure the deal to make it work for the hotelier and for the city. I mean, you know, there's a lot of nuances in exactly how we're going to do that, but we're going to get there. I mean, that's not a problem. But one thing that is, I guess, troubling for me when I read this type of statement, one of the anonymous writers to the Panagraph said, why doesn't the city take this $13 million the developer's asking for and spend it on the roads? But for it, there is no $13 million coming from the project if we don't build it. We can't build it if there isn't a revenue sharing. Why can't we build it? Because we have to put up a parking deck. We're going to historically restore 2 buildings. We're going to build a conference center. The city's not being asked to build a parking deck. The city's not being asked to operate or build a conference center. And the city's not being asked to take the risk of historically renovating these buildings. We're doing all of that. So we need that revenue sharing. When we create that revenue, now all of a sudden there is surplus money. Mr. Friedman's report shows there's annual surplus money for the city that can be used in general fund purposes. And that's the goal of this. It's to create new revenue for the community while enhancing the quality of life in downtown. So with that, I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to introduce Mr. Dave Burnison. Dave is the architectural director at Farnsworth Group. He's been the one that has orchestrated his team around putting some of this info together. I'm going to ask Dave to briefly walk through kind of what the project entails, and then we'll be available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, ladies and gentlemen. You know, as time moves on, it takes its toll on historic buildings and the character of the downtown. So there's been a lot of discussion and ideas and opportunities reach a point where they're almost kind of critical to act on. And my main role in this process is kind of help facilitate vision. Jeff's talking about trying to bring to the city and help people understand what it is that's being thought about and to test those out to make sure that ideas are actually rooted in practicality and something that works. So what we've been focusing on in my office is looking at the front and center building and looking at the Commerce Bank Tower building and exploring ways, is it feasible to think about them having a new life as part of a hotel development. So that's been looking inside the buildings at structural sizes and could rooms fit. You know, a hotelier needs a certain economy of scale to make a development make sense. And we've been talking about 120 guest rooms or so. And then with the blocks and the property to the west side of Madison Street to develop parking facilities and conference center facilities and how to fit all these together is kind of the challenge. It's like a jigsaw puzzle in some respects. Pretty exciting stuff though. If you think about the idea of being able to save these buildings, add to them, give them a whole new life, instead of just seeing them fall apart and in a few years probably have to be, something will have to happen. They're starting to deteriorate. If you walk around, you'll see. So in the imaging, I guess, to get to the next slide, there. We wanted to take a view of what it would be like if you were headed down Madison Street and seeing some possibilities of what could be developed. And this is kind of an artsy rendering. You saw the previous picture of what the view is today. And the idea of some possibilities like renovating front and center building, adding 2 more floors to the part that's only 2-story to get the room count that's needed. Providing a building infill that connects the front and center building and the Commerce Tower, adding more elements to the Commerce Tower so it could have an effective floor plan and have a feeling of some of those neat hotels like in Chicago or some other downtown where you see like a historic hotel type experience. The thought is an entrance that could catch your eye as you're heading down Madison, possibly a skybridge connection over to the other side of the street to a conference center that, and then parking facilities on the other side. A lot of details, a lot of good possibilities, exciting possibilities, I guess I would say. And I don't think I'll go into too much more detail because of time, but I'll be available afterwards if there's any more information people would like to have.
Thank you. We'd be happy to answer questions now.
Actually, if we have any immediate questions, because we may come back to you after, if there aren't any immediate questions, Mr. Gablehausen. Okay. If we have Mr. Friedman come, and then we will, I'm sure, bring you back, Mr. Gablehausen. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor, members of the council, members of the public. I'm Steve Friedman, the president of SB Friedman Development Advisors. With me today is Ronady Bose, who is senior project manager with our firm, and we're going to jointly talk about the project and our review of it. So we were engaged to try to help understand whether this project basically makes sense. What will it do? What will it potentially take to make it happen? And what are the issues and concerns and the potentials in the project? So our methodology here goes into the real estate economics of the project as well as the public economics of the project. So our work included first an understanding of the project itself, which has now been touched on by the architects and the developer. We'll touch on it briefly. And then particularly to look at the project in terms of what need does it have for public assistance. We look at these things as minimizing the amount of public assistance in any project at the same time as you achieve the project which is desired from a public policy standpoint, from a public value standpoint, and which overall has an overall benefit, positive cost benefit. But we want to put as little public money in that as possible. So we start out by trying to understand the project itself and its economics. And we look at the development costs, the operating revenues and expenses, the sources of financing, and the returns. And we benchmark each of these against what information we can find from other comparable projects, from certain data sources that track other deals and tell us what kinds of rates might be attained for debt financing, what kind of rates are being attained for equity financing, what in this case, the typical yield on historic tax credits is, because all of these are part of understanding what the project has to achieve in order for it to be a financially feasible, economically feasible project. And as I think most of us don't want to really appreciate this, but if you think back to what happened in the financial crisis and the way funds stopped flowing around the world, you realize that we also, and the investors in these projects, have to compete in a global market for capital. So it ends up being a globally competitive return that the investors are going to seek. And so that's all part of trying to understand the need for public assistance in the project itself. Then on the other side, we want to look at what the project will produce financially for the city. And in this case, we looked at hotel taxes, sales taxes, food and beverage, and TIF revenues. And the hotel and sales taxes also include an element of forming what's called a business district in Illinois law, which allows an additional tax to be imposed on sales and on hotel rooms.
If we could just clarify that, there had been an attempt to do this in downtown. This would only be this business, this block.
Right now, right. The proposal that we're looking at, the
That
way
you
we
vetted,
looked at
right.
it, limited it to the revenues from this project in these blocks, not for the whole downtown. I realize
Again,
back
there
in
had been
June
a-
there was a proposal for an expansive business district.
Actually, even several years before that. So just to clarify, because there was some misinformation, I think, Mr. Gablehouse and others, we've been trying to make sure that there's,
Right. So right
the
now,
misinformation's out there.
we're looking at this in a way that we sometimes call floating on its own bottom. Sort of a term of art that is floated around the real estate, and then a bad pun, floated around the real estate business. But we're looking at this self-contained. Now, that's not the only way that projects get done. There are projects that will call on revenues that come from outside the project. Just so you know that this is not the only way to do it, but this is where we start looking at it, and if we can keep the project to floating on its own bottom, we're all ahead in this problem of balancing public and private expenditure and public and private responsibilities in trying to create a revitalized downtown. And then two other things we're going to talk about is how to try to structure financial assistance to minimize the city's risk. There is risk. Make no bones about it. There will be some degree of risk in a project that involves redevelopment, new construction, and so on. But what we want to do is to structure the relationship between the project and the private development team in such a way as to minimize the city's risk and manage the city's risk through a whole bunch of elements that we won't go into all the detail of all of those today, but we're going to talk about just some of the basic concepts involved. And then talk about what we think are the next steps. As has been mentioned, it's a $50 million plus project. It takes two historic buildings or potentially historic buildings and renovates them. And it does it in such a manner that a large portion of the project is intended to be eligible for historic tax credits. And the developer has engaged Mike Jackson, who's the former SHPO, State Historic Preservation Officer, to assist him as his historic consultant. So that's a very strange title. The program is 129 rooms. It's a full-service, upper-scale hotel, not a luxury hotel, but a high-quality hotel. And full service means that it's going to have some kind of restaurant and food service within it of a significant nature. In this case, that is actually four food and beverage operations that we'll talk about more later, and they will provide not only for the hotel, but intended to be a destination and a dining destination for the whole community. 12,000 square feet of conference center or meeting space, which most hotels today have some meeting space. This is more than an ordinary hotel. It is less than a full-scale convention center, but it would provide some significant addition to the opportunities for meetings in the downtown and for the businesses in downtown to host meetings here. The three restaurants leased out to separate operators, plus the one that I mentioned, 250 spaces of parking, and then this idea of a sky bridge connecting to the conference center. And there's also, there was an idea that there might be able to be a fifth restaurant on a rooftop. There was no revenue shown, so we actually took it out of our analysis so that we kept it balanced. And there are other possibilities that could happen as the project evolves. But as the project is assessed, this is what we assessed. The BDRP, which is Jeff Gablehausen, is acting as a development facilitator in this process and is trying to assemble the full development team that would have the financial wherewithal and the operating capacities to execute the project. Their request is for $13 million plus the Butler parking lot to be added for zero, and they want that to be based on the TIF food and beverage tax, sales tax generated from the project. Again, they're staying within the project's parameters, so that we're talking about, and I think it's fair to say, we're talking about revenues that would almost exclusively not be in the city. Now, there's going to be an argument about whether some portion of this will be picked up by some other businesses or enterprises around the city. And of course, you basically have two cities, so it's just, is it here or is it in Normal in this game of competition between cities? And it is almost impossible to, with a fine grain, absolutely determine that this is all new revenue, but it is largely new revenue, and it is revenue that will be coming from this site itself. So that, I want to acknowledge that, but this is focused on the revenues that we attribute to this site. Project context, again, you see the Coliseum and the presence in the rest of downtown, and it's clear that this is a site that is not really contributing much to downtown from a broader standpoint. It is kitty corner from the public square, and if it can be brought into a more intense level of use, we think it has the potential to have catalytic impacts and to help attract other activity to downtown. There's a paucity of good restaurants. There is really no place for a visitor doing business in downtown to stay at this time in the downtown. They can stay out on Veterans Parkway and they can stay in downtown Normal. But that opportunity is not afforded here, and that starts to create a level of activity that creates additional activity, attracts other activity. So we do agree that this should be pioneering and should be catalytic, and is the kind of project that you want to undertake. Now, in order to revitalize the downtown, if it makes sense, if it can be afforded, and can be put together. Ranadeep is going to pick up and try to quickly go through the analysis. The memo that we prepared, I think you've all received, and apparently the public has received it too in some form, thanks to Mr. Gablehausen, right? So you put it on the website?
Yes, and it's on the city's website.
And it's
also.
on the city's website. So for more detail, you'll be able to go to the memo, very readily available to all of you. We're going to ask Ranadeep to go through the key elements of our analysis quickly.
Thank you, Steve. Again, I'm Ranadeep Bose with the SP Friedman Development Advisors, and what Steve mentioned, our whole philosophy on doing this is to minimize the amount of public investment that goes into this. You only want to put just that much that is needed and not any more than that. So the way we do this analysis is we actually look at every element that's submitted, all the costs that Steve mentioned. So we look at those, benchmark it against industry sources, and try and see whether there should be adjustments to make sure it's in line with the industry standards. So on the development costs, what we did, it's at this stage still preliminary, but we adjusted the whole budget of $53 million down by $2.5 million. So we outlined some of these. One was the big change was the rooftop bar restaurant, which was there in the cost but wasn't there in the pro forma. So we took that out. We've adjusted the development management and overhead fee, which is a developer fee for doing the project, which is typical, but we made it as a percentage which is more typical with industry standards. So that's a key change. And then we recalculated and adjusted some cost downwards. And actually some costs we actually made a little higher to be in line with industry standards as well. So, but the net effect of all of that was roughly a $2.5 million reduction in the overall budget. The pro forma is the income and expenses, the operations of the project once it's developed. And so we've looked at it up through stabilization here. In the memo, you see the entire 10-year cash flow, which goes beyond stabilization. Now, one of the key things which drive the numbers, which drive the gap, is the assumption on the average daily rate and the occupancy. Now, we have a study from HVS which had a projection of $160 average daily rate in 2018. The proposal we have showed 129, a more conservative number. We, in our analysis, looked at both bookends. We looked at 129 and a higher rate of $150 as the range for the average daily rate, and we went with a higher HVS occupancy of 69%. Now, the 150 we thought was reasonable because there's also a parking charge which is there in the pro forma, so that's roughly $7. So when you add that together, very close to the high end, which is the HVS number that we looked at. Now, the way this works is you take all the revenues from the project, and you get a total revenue, and you get the expenses, and you calculate a net operating income. And so obviously you get a higher net operating income when after subtracting expenses, when you have a higher ADR assumption. And so that's the range that you generate on income, on the net operating income based on the ADR range. So then we get to the sources of financing. So to do a project, BDRP or any developer would have to pull together what we call a capital stack, which is the sources of financing to do the project. Now, we are showing this sources at takeout. So during the project, you actually have a construction loan, and that gets taken out with the permanent loan that or debt that's issued. So the way it works is we take all the sources, which we are taking it at takeout over here. So it's so the table shows the sources that we have. The historic tax credit is a key component. It effectively acts like equity to the project. That's about $5 million, which has been estimated based on the eligible hard costs. So 20% of eligible hard costs can basically, you can monetize that and get a historic tax credit for that. And we are assuming here federal tax, historic tax credit that's essentially a dollar for dollar amount that you get for that project. The permanent loan, we've looked at industry standards to find out what's the amount of permanent loan that this project can have. And we actually took it that you had to have a required threshold on debt coverage, which was 1.6, and you had to be at 70% loan to value. So those were the criteria by which a lender would lend you money. And then the developer has to bring in cash equity. Now, this is where you'll see a big departure from the proposed BDRP budget and our adjusted budgets, where we think that the cash equity, the equity that BDRP and their development partner would have to bring in should be higher. So they have higher skin in the game, and it's matching with the industry standards. The rest of it is what we think is the city assistance layer, and that's actually calculated and detailed further in the returns analysis. So the city assistance should be high enough to generate an adequate return to make the project feasible. And so I'll talk to that a little bit. But those are the sources which add together to the roughly 51 million, which is our adjusted number.
And just to clarify, again, in terms of being attractive, it's not just in central Illinois or Illinois. You were talking about dollars that are competitive within the international political economy.
Yeah. It's basically capital markets, and when we are looking at it, we are looking at sources which are national and Midwest of projects all throughout, and what are the appropriate levels of return to make a project attractive from an investor perspective. So that heads into the returns analysis, which I said was a key component, where we bring all the components of the development budget, the pro forma, and the sources of financial all together, and we create a cash flow line and calculate a return on equity, a target return on equity. So the 18% is what we felt was a good target to go for, and and that also coincides with that debt coverage threshold of 1.6, which is the ratio between net operating income and the permanent loan debt. That's roughly the ratio that needs to be there for it to be a feasible project for a lender to lend to it. Now, what we say is, if you do not provide any city assistance, the return on the developer equity or the developer cash equity is roughly 8.4%, and that's not a level we think which would be attractive to any investors. At the 18% threshold, we again come up with a range of a city assistance which makes it more attractive. And so the 8.2 to 11.2 million essentially coincides with the ADR range that we talked about. So it's the $129 ADR gets you a higher assistance, and then the $150 ADR gets you an $8.2 million. That's how you get to the 8.2 to 11.2 million range. And in both those scenarios, we're talking about an 18% IRR, or a return on the cash equity that the developer is bringing in. So, but at the $13 million and the 150, that's again too much because that gets a return on equity of 30%. So we want it to be not at the level where it's not attractive, not too high. It had to be at that threshold of 18%, which is also the benchmark return which HVS used in their study, and it's similar to the projects we've seen in the Midwest. So I went through how we calculated the first part of our analysis. One is, how do you get to that gap? And it was the return threshold which drove the gap, and we looked at every other piece of the pro forma that BDRP submitted. The second part of it is, what does the project generate in terms of tax revenues? And then, as Steve said, the project floating on its own bottom, that concept, what are the sources of revenue that's generated, and what's the capacity? How much can the city generate so it protects itself, and it's based on revenues from the project itself? To get to that point, we actually look at the sources and basically we come at projections of what drives those revenues. So effectively, right now, it's about $33,000 in annual tax revenues from those two blocks.
If I could just clarify, that's the total. That's not the city's portion. That's the total property tax revenue.
Yes, that's the total property
Sorry,
tax.
thank you.
Yes. So the way we are looking at it is that if you project it out and you do the program, and this program actually gets built, what would be the likely property tax revenues? What would be the sales and food and beverage tax revenues? What would be the hotel motel taxes? Those are the sources of funds that would get generated. And so to do that, we actually look at it from a comparables basis. So what are the taxes that your other top tier hotels in the Bloomington normal market generating, and what is the we use the term equalized assessed value. So what's the assessed value, which is where the taxes are applied? And so we actually calculate. We did a comparable of 4 or 5 hotels, of the top tier hotels in the Bloomington normal market, and came up with what the hotel conference EAV would be, what would be the restaurant EAV, and by looking at comparables. And same thing with the parking structure. We actually look at a State Farm project, and we came up with those EAV, which is the equalized assessed value to which the tax rate is applied, and you calculate the tax rate. Now again, here we actually came up with a much lower EAV projection than what the BDRP projection was, roughly 50% of that projection. But it was based on comparables of what other projects are, how they are actually performing. And then on the sales revenue, we looked at every revenue source from the 4 restaurants, the restaurant within the hotel, as well as the 3 additional restaurants, And the conference center food and beverage revenue as well as the hotel revenue. So the hotel revenue was straightforward. It was the 129 to 150 ADR range. That's what generates that revenue, which is tax. And then the other sources, we looked at benchmarks, and we again went a little conservative. The hotel restaurant, we kept it at the higher level that was assumed because that was also consistent with the HVS study, and they get revenues from the hotel guests. So we kept that at the 2.5 million, which works out to a roughly $550 a square foot. And the others, the other three restaurants, we actually lowered it a little bit to be consistent with Deloitte, the National Association of Restaurant report. And so that's how we came up with the key drivers which drive the tax revenues. And then again, just reiterating that the concept is that there'd be a TIF which encompasses the 2 blocks, and a business district which encompasses the 2 blocks. And the business district would have an additional 1% tax added to it. So, and the idea is that the city local dollars of that full taxes. So the local hotel tax portion, the sales tax, home rule and non-home rule, and the food and beverage gets pledged. And so we calculate the TIF, hotel tax, and sales and food and beverage revenue out of that. And this is at stabilization of projection that we generated. And then finally, we get to the point of, okay, so what does that revenue stream, which is generated from that project as annually after that, how much could you raise if you finance that, if you had a financial instrument, and Steve will go into what kinds of financial instruments could be considered. But the way we did it was we took that revenue stream for 25 years. We actually looked at 20 and 25 years and said, if you took different discount rates, and we took a range of 4.5% to 7%, and that's very dependent on the kinds of financial instruments that could be issued. And we made sure that there's a debt coverage so that not all the money in a given year goes away. A portion of it stays, and only a portion of that is used for financing. The rest stays in the fund. So assuming all of that, again, the ADR range gives you 2 different results, but effectively we get to a financing capacity of 8.8 million to 13.2 million, and that we believe would cover the gap we projected for the project, which is 8.2 to 11.2. And of course, it's dependent on how it's structured, and that's something that Steve will again get into. And I'm turning it over back to Steve here.
Thank you, Randeep. So the conundrum that everyone faces in the this kind of project is that at year 0 there is no revenue till the project's completed, till the project is assessed, and the assessment and the collection of property taxes in McLean County is fairly efficient, so it's at least within 12 months of assessment that you'll see some money. That is not, by the way, true in Cook County, which takes 2 years. But in any case, everywhere else in the state, including here, it's a year. And then the funds become available. So we're building the project year 0, years 18 months, open the project, we begin to achieve some occupancy, there'll be a phase-in of taxes, get substantial occupancy, the project's going to then really begin to generate its revenue, and the funds are now available for supporting the project. Developer is trying to put together the financing today and has to finance the entirety of the construction project. And that includes all the risks of construction. There are construction risks, there's market risks, and so on. The revenue becomes available out 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 years after the project initiates. So in the developer's perspective and the municipal perspective are really opposite each other. The municipal perspective is, well, you give us a nice complete project that's generating all this revenue, and we are happy to now consider assisting you. But if we take that view rigidly, we'll never get the project done because it needed assistance in the first place. So now we try to look at different mechanisms that we can use to participate in the assistance to a project, and we look at them from the standpoint of lesser risk to greater risk and higher financing costs to lower financing costs. So the approach that, one approach that a developer who has enough access to capital can, in a sense, overfinance the project because they have a very good credit rating, they have a strong reputation with the bank that'll increase a construction loan, they have their own resources that they can make available on a temporary basis, is to use what's called a developer note, in which the revenues that will come later are pledged through a note to the project or to the note that is held by the developer. Sometimes those notes are saleable. Sometimes, if they're not carefully structured, they are factorable, which is what you really don't want because they would be discounted. But they can be held by a developer, I sometimes joke, in the college fund for their children. And then they can, in effect, fund the project through the development stage. At the point where a project is stabilized, we can often access the special revenue bond market, which is a form of a bond and is usually privately placed. And it's a bond, and it'll go out at an intermediate rate. So if the developer note was at 7%, the revenue bond might be at 5.5%. These are all just conceptual numbers. And only the project's revenues are pledged to the revenue bond. Now, you can also add some other things to a revenue bond. If it's a bigger TIF, you can have an area-wide pledge. We've seen adjacent TIFs have their revenues pledged to support a revenue bond, but they're all very structured, non-general revenues. Then there are some cities that have used for their TIF programs an alternate type revenue bond with a special tax backing, like a sales tax. Rockford does this. And that gets you a little better rate, doesn't pledge the full faith and credit of the municipality, but it's increasing the amount of risk because you're going to pay for that no matter what, well beyond the revenue from the project if something goes awry. The rate will go down. And then the greatest risk is if you do a full alternate revenue, or a full revenue bond, a full general obligation bond, or an alternate revenue bond with geo backing, which would tap first the revenues of the project, but if they fall short, then the general obligation of the city would be used, the full municipal full faith and credit. And that will give you the lowest financing cost, but it is the highest risk because you're participating in the primary fundamental risk of the project along with the first mortgage holder and the developer. Mixing the various approaches can begin to balance the risk and the cost and the feasibility of the project. So let's say so there might be some elements that a city might actually use geo bonds for, like a parking structure, or there might be an element which it will own then, and there might be another element that it might take some risk on. It might take risk in some cases on land assembly, but then when it comes to the construction and operation risks, make sure those are all shifted back to the private sector. So this is all subject to the reality of what actually is there at the point that the full development is put together, and will ultimately have to be negotiated in that context. But these are some of the tools that can be used to try to moderate the risk. Mayor,
Yeah, if I could just clarify. So, for example, if I understand what you're saying, in terms of mixing the risk, if the city's skin in the game were to build the parking deck, even though it's proposed that we not, but that could be something that a geo bond could be used for, and we would have that.
Right. It's lesser risk because you
and then we would own the parking garage.
Wouldn't suggest building it speculatively. You would
Right.
only build it as part of the hotel
no,
project.
of course.
Right, okay.
Yeah, no,
Just to be
yeah.
clear, we're not saying go out and buy
I thought that was a given.
we're not saying buy a bunch of land and build a parking
Well,
deck and somebody will
no,
come.
no. Yeah, there are enough rumor mills out there. I don't want more.
Right.
But then we could use TIF money to pay for that bond.
Yes, you could, and the
Okay.
alternate revenue, that's the alternate revenue, and then you use geo backing to, behind it. So you're moderating the risk each way, but there is risk at that point, because if the revenue, if the project doesn't materialize or the project is weaker, you'll have less TIF revenue to pay for it with. But those are some of the more beginnings, only the beginnings of the complexities that I think the city will have to come to, we'll be looking at as we understand the real risk. This is the hypothetical project. This is what I call the believable fiction, and our analysis has I think, supported that it is believable. But until we get to having a full development team, it is still not a project. So let me try to summarize. We've got enough, we think we need $8 to $11 million in assistance as the project sits today. We think there's capacity from the revenues generated to produce $9 to $13 million. These are all in present value terms. The city, because the way we look at it, we think the city should have a margin of 25% on any of the pledges of its revenues, and that's a policy decision for you because you're home rule. If you were a non-home rule community and you were trying to use any of these bonding mechanisms, that would be basically required by state law, but it's actually a wise thought, we think. And so that results in along the way you have some benefit from the project, and in the end you have about $5 to $9 million of city benefit. Even within the numbers as we saw them. We think it's a pioneering project, and we've talked about mitigating the risk. But what do you have to do next in order to have a real project that's really ready to move forward? And so we would suggest that BDRP, as a facilitator here and development facilitator, has a good bit of work to do to bring forward a commitment from an appropriately experienced and hotel developer who knows how to do rehab, knows how to operate a hotel, has financial resources to tap into the equity markets and be recognized by the debt markets and by the flags. He produced the formal evidence of site control. This is just mechanical, but it's basic. Financing commitments from each. There's at least 3 types of layers here outside of the city. There are lenders, tax credit buyers, and the cash equity investors. The other tenants for the other restaurant spaces, as well as there's a piece of it that includes potentially having Commerce Bank have a branch. Those leases. Franchising agreement from a hotel brand. Then, along with that, real plans, detailed plans that are to and these usually come in different stages, so we wouldn't necessarily get them all at once, and that's another element of risk in any real estate project. You don't draw working drawings until you have gone through conceptual and schematic and so on, so there are going to be some stages there, but at a certain point we have to have enough detail that we know that what's being built, that enough analysis has been done of the risks in the rehab, and there will always be surprises in rehab. Sorry, there will always be surprises, but that we are mitigating some of that risk, and that we can really cost that out, and we have a good sense that we have firm costs, and that costing can come from contractors, and there are also professional cost estimators who have experience to go through item by item and see that things have been tracked. And then final projections that we can all make a deal around. We don't have enough of all the prior things before you get to projections to make a definitive deal. We have enough to say that it looks like we have something that can work. So what we're suggesting that the city do at this point, is to endorse the efforts to advance the project, understanding that what I'll call the lion's share of the revenues over 20 to 25 years will be committed to the project. We're looking at it being that because of using it, if we can stick with the debt coverage of 25%, or with a coverage of 25%, well, the city will get 25%, 20 or 25% of all the revenues over the years, but it is the lion's share that will need to be committed to make this project work. To initiate now the creation of the TIF and business districts, and this is where the idea of the inducement resolution that Mr. Gablehausen mentioned, it comes in. That would all be part of a potential action that could be taken. And that will move that timetable forward because their creation takes a minimum of 6 months. It can technically be done in 6 months under state law. I have almost never seen it be done in 6 months, but it could be. But so we want to get that started so that it's in place to move forward. And we think that the city should know what other views of the value of the site are. We know there's also already been controversy about that. It's a negotiated price at this time in a context of a potential redevelopment, and it may never change. And which is not uncommon in redevelopment. There are holdouts, there are situations where you just cannot overcome and maybe get the price that you really think you'd like to get, but it's nice to have some other views of what the property is worth, which is what a formal appraisal would provide, and what you're working with. And then we're suggesting that it would be perhaps 4 to 6 months for BDRP to obtain these commitments. Shorter is better, but they be given a specific period of time in order to do it, and then if that can't be done, you have to look at what the next steps are. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, City Manager Hale.
Mayor, if I could, before we go back to the council, I'd like to finish kind of the staff presentation, ask Kathy Orr, the city's special legal counsel, to come forward. Not that she's going to make it, a long presentation, but she has been an integral member of our staff team and she's been involved in watching the progress, and I thought maybe, Kathy, you could just add anything you would like to highlight some of these key points. What can be done at this stage or at later stages to try to minimize that city risk? And secondly, Kathy was very involved here recently in Normal in giving an excellent presentation of good deals, bad deals. And I'm thinking of kind of an email from one of our aldermen about some examples out there, but I won't ask you to get into that.
The bad deals, I'd be here 3 days. So we won't.
Yeah, I think we have a potential good deal here, but could you just kind of add any final points you think would be appropriate before we get into a discussion, question and answer with the council?
I've had the honor of working with Steve Friedman and many other consultants over the years and appreciate their analysis of a project so that you know where your money is going or what it's being asked to finance. My point of view as a municipal attorney working with you, being honored to work with you, is risk. Minimizing risk. I want to work for you for many years. I do not want to try to put together a deal that tanked. And so risk is the most important factor. And I take it simply, very simply. Risk is very dependent on when you put your money into a deal. And I think that's what Steve was talking about. Jeff referred to the project that we're working on in Colonial Plaza and that it is the same. It is not the same because in Colonial Plaza, we're going to negotiate giving a note and then paying down the note with the revenues. If the revenues never come, oh well, we're not liable. And so what you want is you want to put your money in where the return is, in fact, less of a risk, which I think is what Steve was talking about. This is very important. There are many ways. In my speech, before all the administrators, there were 5 points that I do, very simple points when you go into a development. Number one, your developer needs to have experience. And I think Jeff, with all of his experience, has and knows more construction. Putting a deal together as developer, he will demonstrate to us. Number two, you have to have a concept plan, a final concept plan, before you get in bed with anybody. And I think Steve made a very clear point of that. That's not to suggest that it could not be put together, because as he says, we go to concepts. Number three is financing. Until you have your financing, how can we get into the ball game unless you show us that you have your financing? After that, it's a matter of projections and getting through the process. One of the things I recommend as a municipal attorney, when you commit dollars to a project, we are going to have costs to this project. Unfortunately, and I mean this seriously, our police, our fire department are going to be needed to service any commercial project. And so when we commit dollars to a project, we better make sure that we've retained enough of those revenues to satisfy your needs, because it would not be right for our taxpayers to pay any percentage of that. So these are the things that I look at as a municipal attorney, working with the municipality over a long term, even after the project is under construction, whether it's succeeded or not.
Thank you.
Any questions? I'm here.
Questions? Yeah.
Just one more. You know, as Mr. Freeman said, this is a redevelopment project. Could you share with the council, you know, what you've done in your experience when, again, like it was said, there is going to be some surprises. So would you just comment briefly on that and how the city and the developer can work together to try and deal with unforeseen costs that could come after all the deals?
Right. You put together the best format. You take your dollars and cents, you put it together, you still hold out 10% to pay for our costs as a municipal service provider. You do all that, and then there's a problem that occurs in construction. And for those of us, and I too, my home is over 50 years old, the simplest thing is not a simple thing. So basically, the issue is depth of financing. And when the first issue occurs, and it always does, when the first issue occurs, where do we go? We do not want to be put in a position as the municipality to be the only additional source of financing. So as we get forward in our concept plan, and that's why the projections, and Steve even mentioned that maybe it would be a good idea to deal with a rehabber specialist who's gone through major projects, so that the contingency in terms of putting the package together is large enough. And you know, in every construction project, there's a contingency line. Here, we better have one large enough, because it is a very difficult project, as laudable as it is.
And Mayor, if I could, that kind of completes staff presentation. I would like to kind of reserve some time as after the questions and answers and the discussion to talk a little bit more about what we would be seeking from the city council. But I think that's a little premature. So I think the time is to turn it back to you, Mayor, and Alderman, for questions of any people who spoke, either Mr. Gablehausen or any of our staff members who have been very involved.
Any questions of anyone or comments? Let's go ahead. Alderwoman Schmidt, whose ward includes this.
First right too, okay. And thank you very much for this very thoughtful and detailed analysis. I really appreciate the assessment of risk and opportunities to think about how to move forward on this. I have a couple of questions for either Mr. Bose or Mr. Friedman. One of them has to do with the conference events. I think you scaled them down to 2 a week from, I think it might have been 4. And just thinking about, I guess I want to know more about how you based that. Where did that number come from, and what happens if you don't attain that in general? I mean, you know, I think that's one of those things where obviously you have to begin to build a market. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we scaled it back to 2 because we thought that 4 is very aggressive in terms of the number of conferences. Now, we didn't have an independent market validation for the restaurants of the conference. So the key resource we had was the HVS study on the market side of it. So there was, and that's what we relied on as the primary source for validating the ADR assumptions, the occupancy rate assumptions, and there was a conference center as part of that. And there was no other validation on the restaurant feasibility or the market feasibility of the hotel. Other than that, our scope focused primarily on the deal as presented and the revenues and expenses on that.
I guess I would say we scaled it back to try to be a little more conservative, but we would not consider that definitive. And one of the things that we would think would come forward as part of the final package would be updates and further analysis of those kinds of elements as well.
Right, I guess I'd be interested in seeing a what-if analysis. Suppose it's only one a week, or, you have dry spells, or however
And
that market works.
Easy enough to do
Right.
those kind of sensitivity tests. I would hazard a guess, and Ronit, you can tell me I'm wrong or kick me across the room, but that it's a small enough portion of the revenues that that sensitivity is not going to be of major impact in terms of, it will be of impact, it won't, have an impact of some kind, but I don't think that it is of a scale that it would have an impact on the basic concept and the basic notion that you want to have some conference space in the hotel.
Thank you. And then another question I had for you had to do with what we refer to as the Butler lot, where I believe the idea is that since the city owns it, that might be something that we bring to the table. So as an asset, how does that fit into our contribution to this project?
So one of the pieces that we would want to see you get an appraisal on would be the Butler lot, so you know what the value is of additional value, potential value, although recognizing how difficult it is to develop these lots, it's a kind of an interesting value question.
Right.
But you want to know that, and the way it has been factored into the analysis, though, is at no additional hard dollar cost to the development project. So your return for that lot is part of your overall return from the project in the long run. But we've not put a dollar value in it. We have not charged the development $1 million or something for that lot. It is part of what would end up being tallied as the city's contribution. And we don't know what that's worth at this point.
Thank you. And then I had one final question for Mr. Hales that has to do with the infrastructure, water, sewer. I know that we've had Kevin Cothey and others, I think, work with Farnsworth maybe, or some company to help us understand what the capacity is underneath the streets and what we might have to do to upgrade that. Do we have a sense of the cost of that and where that fits into our funding?
We have a very preliminary estimate, and like you say, the engineers did kind of look at what do we know about the assets, especially the underground assets, utilities around this block. Those have been identified, including what we might face. I can't recall the exact dollar amount, but there is they believe, probably a cost that will have to be incurred at some point. Now, whether or not those are going to be duplicative of what Mr. Gablehausen has in his, we won't know that, but I do think that as the project proceeds, and as they get the detailed, even their engineers will be looking at what are the utility capacities, what are their needs around there. They'll help identify that, and then we can come back and have a final, more definitive number of what's going to take in the way of surrounding infrastructure and utility lines. I also want to bring out that another thought is recently, as I was talking with John Butler and Bart Rogers, indicated that if this project continues, we'd want to have additional discussion of, is there other ways to kind of optimize connectivity between the conference center and the Coliseum? So even though there's one aerial walkway being shown in this, we may find that to maximize the appeal of the Coliseum to future conferences, maybe there should be a second walkway. So, but I think that's part of how we'll bring back detail on how we even improve the marketability of the Coliseum, Conference Center, hotel, and so forth. So there's some additional dialogue we definitely want to have with the SIAM management team, as well as the Convention and Visitors Bureau, who has a good handle of what these conference parties are looking for and how we can appeal to even more events coming to Bloomington.
Was that it? Alderwoman? Alderwoman Howman?
Thank you, and good information. I appreciate everything you've shared with us, both Jeff and Steve and Sandy? Ronnie, sorry. Okay. I'm curious, the average daily rate for rooms, and I know that this is going to be a full-service upscale hotel, but the numbers I'm seeing are a lot less than $129 for the last year through the Illinois Hotel and Lodging Association. Can you help me? I mean, it's almost 50% less.
That's right. And the way that study essentially takes every hotel property in the entire market. So you would have Motel 6 as part of that subset. The way HVS does it is they take a selected set which is comparable hotels. So it tends to be what is considered the competitive set. So it's the top tier hotels in the market. If you're building a new construction hotel in downtown Bloomington, we would consider that as a top tier hotel and would compete with the top hotels in the market. And so those average daily rates would be significantly higher than the overall market average daily rate.
So other than the Marriott and Uptown Normal, what else would be the competition in terms of the
That would
pricing?
be one of the hotels which, that has a lot more rooms.
That's DoubleTree, yeah.
Yeah. So it would be the Hyatt Place I would say is the competition, which is right across. I think there's a Residence Inn which is fairly new. So the newer properties would definitely be competition, and the Marriott downtown and the Hyatt Place, at least those four I can imagine. And I think HVS study went a little further in identifying the entire competitive set.
The report we have is just it's a composite, so and it doesn't even give the range, just the average. So I was just curious. Okay.
Travel data information, the recent she gets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but on the, sure. So that was shared with us this afternoon. Smith, for those who aren't aware, Smith Travel Research is basically the major national compiler of data about hotels, and you can get very specific data if you pay a lot for it, but they made available to someone a general cover of the various hotel markets in the state. And I think one of the things that was interesting and positive about the year-to-year comparison for the Bloomington MSA was that the occupancy for the year 2015, it was up about 8% from 2014. Now, hotel markets are volatile. That's the nature of them. And when it's good, it's very, very good. And when it's bad, it's awful. Like, which kid is that in which children's book? But they grow over time with the ups and downs. They grow as the economy grows. Now, your economy hasn't been as robust as perhaps you might like it to be, but then some of the investments that you can make may help to support some of the other activities of other people in the market. But the fact that it was up 8% year to year, I thought was very good. The other thing that happens as new hotels come on the market, there's segmentation and and properties that basically are no longer competitive because they're not providing the quality product that the consumer wants will struggle, but the new hotels may do very well because they are picking up an element of demand that the product that's there doesn't. And frankly, that's important to any economy to keep modernizing and moving forward. And it's there are always adjustments that are made by those who cannot compete anymore.
Don't go away.
Okay.
Um, Under the development budget category, and then the bullet, development management and development overhead, you reduced that considerably, and I'm wondering what the discrepancy might have been with
Well,
that.
okay, the discussion is and is going to be about what impact the nature of the market and the complexity of the project has on the cost of delivery. The hard costs had a construction management fee in it, which we didn't touch, we didn't change. And we thought that the numbers of layers of development management that were building up into that development fee on top of the construction management fee were a little high. So we looked at it that way and we cut it back. The counter argument is that this is a small market, it's a complicated project, and in order to attract the developer, they're going to have a larger fee as part of their fee. So it's probably going to end up being one of those items that is negotiated about as to what's actually appropriate in the final project. But we thought there was maybe a little bit too much and a little bit more, considering that there was already a CM fee in the hard costs.
Thanks very much.
Alderman Shade.
Thanks. And I have some questions for Mr. Friedman, but I'm going to go to Mr. Gablehausen first, okay, and give you a chance to have a seat. So, Jeff, thanks for the presentation. Just a handful of questions here, and in no particular order, maybe a couple of more specific itemized questions. From the Friedman report, there were a couple of points or changes made, I think, relative to your proposal versus their proposal. One of those was, and I guess my question would be, how do you respond to the Friedman analysis that more revenue is needed from the developer side rather than the city side?
I think it's really about return for risk. And that's going to be, as we continue to talk to our hotelier, that's what they're going to have to balance, and the feedback we're going to get from them. I certainly respect the comments about the unknowns. And that is one of our biggest concerns, is the unknowns that we get into with these historic buildings. As was a comment that was made in the meeting that we had last week with staff, was saying, if the front and center building wasn't there and we just built up from scratch, how does that work? Well, obviously, it allows us to be much more precise with all of our estimates and a lot less cost. So one of the things that the developer is going to be looking at, the final hotel developer, is if they put all their skin in the game up front and we run into some of these unknowns that Ms. Orr talked about, then we have more of an issue. So we need to keep some powder dry to be able to address some of that.
And so I think the point you're trying to make is kind of to borrow Mr. Friedman's term, the conundrum between greenfield and brownfield development. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the blessing and the curse of having a great downtown.
And I guess that's one of my major concerns, right, is there will be delays and there will be additional costs associated with that. We simply can't project or estimate what those will be, just given the nature of brownfield.
Yeah, all we can do is look to mitigate and how we're going to address them. Yes, sir.
And then another point brought out from the report was the reduction of the development and management charges.
Yeah, and that one, that number came exactly from the hotel development group. I mean, that was their number, and I will tell you, they also view that number as part of their contingency. Obviously, if they run into unexpected issues, one of the first things they have to put into the deal is those type of numbers. And all we have to do is really look 40 miles to the west to the Peoria project when the renovation of the Pierre Marquette was done. And, that developer had a $7 million development fee, as in the Journal Star and Peoria many, many times, and on about a $90 million project. So, but because they ran into some unknowns, it's my understanding that, they basically ended up having to put them back into the project.
Right. And thanks, Jeff. And then the final question is, and this is more philosophical in nature. I've gone back and done a fair amount of reviewing of all the conversation and discussions related to the Coliseum. And one of the things that was presented as ironclad in concrete, right? There would be no taxpayer money needed to support that project. Not only would the Coliseum cover its operating expense, it would also cover the bond expense associated with the building itself. And I guess and I've had calls from a number of constituents about that too, right? I mean, how do you respond to those folks that say, we've been there, we've done that, you know, fool me once, shame on, you, fool me twice, shame on me.
But there's a 100% difference. The Coliseum is owned by the city. It's essentially a department of the city for all practical purposes. This hotel is not going to be a department of the city. It's not going to be owned by the city. The conference center is not going to be a department of the city. It's not going to be owned by the city. These are private businesses that have to stand on their own.
Okay.
And there is such a clear distinction there. I don't know that it can be any clearer. One's owned publicly, one's owned privately.
So then a follow-up question, and hypothetically, given, and there have been a number of different revenue streams identified, hotel rooms, food and beverage, property taxes, and so forth. But I'm trying to figure out, move along the revenue path here, right? Hypothetically speaking, then, if for some reason those projected hotel room revenues, the taxes from those, food and beverage, property tax, the various revenue streams, if those don't materialize as projected and the city doesn't get sufficient revenue from the project to cover the proposed bond payments, where would the money come from then to cover the bond payments?
Well, I'm going to defer that question to the final structure of the deal because it really does depend upon how the deal was structured. First off, though, if it's built in Illinois, then property taxes are paid. If not by the entity that owns it, then by a property tax buyer that comes in and writes a check to the county. So one way or the other, if it's built, there are property taxes paid. So that part gets checked off, so to speak, as a guaranteed revenue stream. With regard to the hotel motel tax or the sales tax, you start looking at the sensitivity. I think Mr. Friedman talked about a 25% city take on the deal. I mean, one of the things that he's already done in his analysis that he laid out there was put up a 1.25 debt coverage ratio. So if the estimates, projections are down by 25 or 30%, it's still covered because in his recommendation, he's putting in a debt coverage ratio. On top of that, there's revenues that the city's making to fund the additional operating expenses. So that's yet another layer. So I think that there's a sensitivity analysis that Friedman certainly can run that's going to say there's probably going to be a number that might be a 40 or 45% occupancy, where, it starts to get tough. But realistically, do we believe that that's going to occur? I mean, might it be a risk? Kathy Orr said nothing's without risk, but is it really a plausible risk?
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Mr. Friedman, a few questions for you. And I'll also start off by saying thanks for your presentation. And again, these are in no particular order. You mentioned in your report, I think you used the word synergy in terms of its relationship to the Coliseum. We had somebody else who came before us a couple of years ago and had done some analysis potentially on a downtown hotel and the impact on the Coliseum. And it was suggested that it would have little or no effect on the number of bookings, the profitability, the enhanced, improved operation of the Coliseum. How would you respond to that?
Randeep, do you want to comment on that? This idea of the relationship between the two?
If I could just clarify, which was the study that came to us?
There was a gentleman, there was a consultant that we...
HVS? Was it the HVS study?
I don't recall which one, but
No.
there was an outside person that came.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, we did fault them for that.
So that, right. And I think we had a limited amount of synergy. I don't think we said it was going to revive the Coliseum in total, but there'd be some interaction. And that Randeep can speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, first, we didn't quantify the synergy. We believe, though, that there is potential because if there's an event at the Coliseum, you have the opportunity in a hotel next door to you, which has rooms, has a dining destination, to have the ability for customers to utilize all of them. So just like conceptually, we talk about the synergy. We're not yet at the point where we can quantify it. And the question which you raised is whether there's additional bookings which come in. And I think part of, and that's something I'd have to verify whether how the HVS study took it into account. But the idea is, and that's something which is what analyzing further is whether you have the opportunity for more bookings which require overnight stays at the Coliseum. And that opportunity right now is less if you don't have an adjacent, what is almost like a headquarter hotel. Here it would almost function like that because it's adjacent with the restaurant dining destination and the Coliseum. That's the idea we were qualitatively assessing.
Sure. So I want to be sure I understand. So are you suggesting then that it is premature to definitively state or say with a high confidence level that a hotel will improve the operational profitability of the Coliseum?
I think the operational performance, that's a quantification which I think we wouldn't be able to right now do that. Conceptually, we would expect it to be better because there's the opportunity to capture events which you would potentially not being able to do right now if you don't have a headquarter hotel, and it makes it more attractive.
Sure.
I mean, I think that's the way we can. There's no.
And I understand. So I want to just be sure I'm clear, right? Because I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, so I want to be sure I'm clear here, right? Again, I'll ask. It would seem to me to be premature to say definitively that a hotel will improve the operational profitability of the Coliseum. Not to say that it might not, but right now it's conjecture, speculation, opinion.
Yeah, and I don't think that, I would agree, we don't know how to quantify, we haven't tried to quantify it, it wasn't part of what our scope was. So, at some point it may be a core issue, but it's not. I think there are other benefits, though, of the hotel, some of them qualitatively as Ranadeep has described, and then just the creation of the activity center that quite separate from the Coliseum, which I understand the Coliseum is a difficult problem for the city, but that quite separately are important benefits of the hotel.
Sure.
Alderman, if I could I just, on that same topic, Steve, would you just comment on, is there any additional research that could be done by HVS to help provide, a higher confidence level on what kind of impact this hotel might actually have on the conference center, as, we've discussed in the past?
I'm sure there is, and there's a methodology for the estimating the demand of things like the Coliseum that involves working with a database of all the events, typically around the state, because these kind of facilities pick up sort of state-oriented events and people move them around and so on. So there's a certain pool of events that HVS, I believe, would have a database of or would augment a database of, and then they would look at the competition here and there. I don't know what studies have been done of the Coliseum when it was built or since or strategically by the operator, so I can't comment on how much more this would be than what has been done, but that's the kind of methodology. And then some of those events, they would be looking at events that are that do involve overnight stays. So like, for example, youth sports often involve overnight stays. And people pay, by the way, pretty good room rates for those. They may pack all their kids in one room, but they pay pretty good room rates. I frequently stay at a Hampton Inn that is, and it's not an inexpensive Hampton Inn, and the room rates are actually pretty comparable to these room rates, and it's packed with these families doing that. So to the extent there's youth sports at the Coliseum, the hotel will be a convenience for them. Whether it will result in more bookings of youth sports, I think that's partly a question that an HVS could investigate, that we haven't investigated.
Couple more questions.
Sure.
I'm curious just from kind of a process perspective / best practice perspective, where when you come in to do an analysis like this, I guess I'm wondering where a more specific, a wider use of an RFQ and RFP process. Do you? I guess I'm wondering, are you invited in oftentimes to do kind of a review of a single proposal, or is how does the best practice process work for that? It would seem to me, and why I'm asking, and please correct my ignorance, right? That I would think that prior to bringing you in for an analysis, there would have been a more widely used RFQ, RFP process and some winnowing down of multiple projects, and then have your analysis done. What am I missing?
Okay, so if you own the land, as you own other land in the downtown that you could do this with, you can do a solicitation for developers, and we do that kind of work. What we do when we do that is we like to come up with what we do call believable fiction, and very much more of a fiction than this. This is much more developed than our fiction would be. But we want to show developers what kinds of things we think are possible, what kinds of things you all as a city council would want to see and would approve if they came back with that. And also understand what the financial ramifications of that are to the city and what we can expect or can try to hope to expect in terms of a bid on the land, whether it's zero or a significant amount of money. And then we would be involved in evaluating. We would do that in two stages because developers hate beauty contests. They don't want to spend a lot of money on the first stage. We'd first get qualifications that they can pretty much do off the shelf, show us you understand our goals and what kind of things we're looking for. Then we'd shortlist, we'd review those, review their financial capacity, their experience, and pick 3 to 6, depending on how big the project is, to ask for proposals, and then review the proposals and so on. If you own the land, you don't own the land. So when somebody owns the land or controls the land, in this case, that's proposing this, bringing this forward, the municipality then has to review what they're brought. And they can shape it, they can influence it, they can nudge it along, they can say, no, absolutely, we don't want that, and come back with something else that falls within the parameters of our downtown plan or our vision plan or some other kind of leadership document, if you will, that the city would have adopted. But when you don't own the land, you have different level of things that you can do. And in those cases, we are often involved in just reviewing that single proposal, trying to get a workable and best deal for the city that works for the private sector.
And just, Kathy, you were nodding too.
No, that is a perfect answer, because we had discussions. We had several discussions a year or two ago with staff about going for RFP, and the issue is we don't control the land. I can't go and offer to sell your house or your house or your house. I can't offer to, renovate it. I have to own it. And that's the difference here. We're municipalities, and we have worked with many municipalities who, because, especially where there are tax delinquencies, bought out blocks of commercial property. We then ask for RFQs, RFPs, and you pick and choose. Here we have an individual who controls the property, so all we can do is react.
Okay. And then finally, Mr. Friedman, I'm going to ask you the same question and maybe expound on a little bit that I asked Jeff. And again, I'm talking hypothetically here, right? We've identified multiple revenue streams. One of the financing options, and again, you kind of laid out a continuum there, something that puts most of the risk on the developer and puts versus, much more of the risk on the city, at least for our part of the,
right.
Rather. So hypothetically, if for some reason, your fault, my fault, nobody's fault, right? if those projected revenue streams do not materialize as estimated, as forecasted, where would the money come from then for the city to cover its bond, its portion of the bond payments that would be needed to be made?
Okay, so it
Let
depends.
me be even less theoretical and get right. I mean, in my mind, it would require the city then to spend its own money to cover those outstanding bond payments if the revenue streams were not there as projected. Is that correct?
Let me go back to my chart a little
Okay.
bit, because it is, if you're all the way over here on the right side of greater risk where you put geo backing, then yes. Now, you also were asking the distinction between the Coliseum and this kind of a project, and I do agree with Mr. Gablehausen. This is essentially a private project. So even under the worst case of that, for some reason, the city actually advanced money before the project was completed, which is not what we are advocating. We want to push it toward the other side. But you're still dealing with about 20%, 25% of the project, not 100% like you are in the Coliseum. If the hotel gets completed and brought and operates, it can operate, if it's not as successful as expected, it can operate at a lesser rate, it can operate at a lower occupancy, but it will still generate some portion of tax revenues. It won't generate as much. So you would have some risk associated with those shortfalls. And the extent to which there's a risk depends on how far down this continuum the city is, and where the risk falls, whether it and what it affects. Your sales tax is in your general fund, so in a sense it's not that different than full faith and credit, but it doesn't affect your property tax for other things except indirectly. So if you're in the middle ground here, if it's a straight revenue bond with nothing but the pledges from the revenues from the project, and they don't materialize, you're not at risk. So it depends, and it's going to depend on the strength of the developer and the strength of their financing. That and the city can always say it's just not enough at that point. But you probably want to, I think, be communicating the idea we need to stay on the left side here. We are willing to make pledges of your revenue back to you, but it's got to be your revenue. And so we want to then, and keeping that message out there so that becomes part of the dynamic tension between the city and the developer. But yes, indeed, if you went all the way over to the right side, yeah, you could have risk.
So a follow-up question then. So it's back to the best practice kind of. I started thinking about after what you said and after what Kathy said. In your experience, where do you see that projects like this are more successful? Is it when the city is reacting to a single project, or is it? And when I say successful, I mean minimized risk to the city. Is it more successful where there has been the more robust use of the RFQ RFP process beforehand, or is it and then reacting to those different possibilities, or reacting to a single project?
Well, it depends to some extent, that depends how much risk you had to take to get to the point where you had a site that was worth putting out for RFP, or for RFQ, RFP, where you could actually get a good development out of it. So if you have, if you spent and put at risk $7 or $8 million to acquire a site, you have a lot of risk already.
Right.
Before you've ever gone out and asked for an RFQ or RFP, and unless you have a pretty good idea, if it falls into your hands because it became tax delinquent and you've gathered it back for various reasons, that's one thing. But if you have to go out and acquire it at a high price, that's a different thing. But if the only way to get it redeveloped was for you to acquire it, that's worth considering. But here, that's not the only way to get this site redeveloped. We have somebody who's trying to put the deal together. What comes out better? How much more competition do you get? I don't think I can quantify that. I think the when you have a party who's come to you who controls the land, you negotiate as hard as you can, and you use all these benchmarking techniques that we've talked about.
Sure.
So that you understand what the options are and what they're dealing with, what you're dealing with, and where you find the middle course to get a good deal that works. When you have direct competition, we've had shootouts between, not literally, but in the business sense of shootouts between developers. Like, I had one developer coming to me saying, you really ought to pick us, and you ought to really make that decision right now. And I just said to him, you should not want us to make that decision right now. And he got the message that he had to do a whole lot better to get the deal. And he did eventually get the deal, but he had to do a whole lot better. Well, that is that's the benefit you get when you do own the land. But that community had put about $7 or $8 million into assembling that site, and they still actually had more to go. So they were at risk for $10 million before they had anybody at the table. So there's times to negotiate, and this is that kind of time. You don't own this site.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Alderman Lauer and then Millawamble.
Steve, don't sit down, I'm sorry. I'm probably going to have some more questions here.
I
don't want to keep you all night, but
that's all right.
I don't also want to be perceived as throwing hot or cold water on this entire thing, but I am very skeptical. I am probably the biggest what-if guy here.
Okay.
I made my living trying to define those what-ifs so that I minimize the risk to my operation, and so I'm trying to minimize the risk to the entire community, and I'm trying to think of that in terms of all-encompassing, not just our downtown. We have a number of entities that are currently having a real rough time in the hotel market, and I don't think that we should be perceived as a community to play favorites or have an unfair playing field here. There are a number of properties that are being looked at. Some are even actually owned, and some folks from both inside and outside the community are looking at development, and probably without city assistance. The economy is not favorable for that, as you have surmised. And so given the right timing, this may happen anyway. It just may not be where we as a group want it to happen. And I'm not sure that's necessarily our choice. Do we want things to happen? Well, sure. But business is business, and competition is competition. And so I'm not sure that we're being completely fair with everybody. It bothers me that we're hinging everything that we're looking at right now on one study, by the way. And I'm not suggesting that the city should go out and do another study. But I would think that, there ought to be some deeper thought in terms of study and analysis before we go ahead and make some sort of decision like this, especially in view of the current economic conditions that we have here. We have to be understanding that not only is it Bloomington, but it's also normal. And there's some folks who have put some considerable risk in act recently, and they've got a different market than we do, but we do compete very directly because we're only a few miles apart. So it concerns me not only that, but we do have competitors that are currently in the market, and I don't want to be perceived as forcing somebody out. We'll have a rough time attracting further investment in many different aspects of business if we are. Yeah, the RFQ thing is an issue, and I think that there probably ought to be a way that a municipality could look at qualifications at some point. So that's just a comment. It bothers me that this is being driven not necessarily by the community itself. It bothers me that I perceive it to be driven much more by a comprehensive plan that was required by the federal government rather than innately by the community.
No, we passed the downtown plan.
Yeah, I understand that, and it was driven by the
driven by the
comprehensive
federal
plan to
government.
start with. Yes, it was.
How is
It's a
that driven by the
requirement.
federal
Well,
government?
I'm not going to
Kevin?
argue with you, sir, but that's the case. Priorities. I would think that the city has a lot of other priorities right now in terms of infrastructure, such as our sewers and our streets. I don't blame you folks and I compliment you for all the work you've done. And certainly we can do more than one thing at once, but we're not doing an adequate job of a number of things that we should be doing. And I think that our time is better spent and our effort is better spent looking at the primary things first. It bothers me that the location, and we're basically on the tab here if there's any risk at all involved. Revenue bonds, okay, I can buy that, I understand that. But anything further, it seems that the cost of the location is a concern. The city even owns property in the neighborhood, and we could be in the RFQ business if we were looking at that property itself. Not that I'm saying or advocating that we should do that, but that's just the case. Again, why would the city accept any risk at this point? I don't see that. If we had a burgeoning economy and we had an area that clearly needed a lot of help, and we do have areas like that in the city. As a matter of fact, there's a number in Ward 1 that I'm working on, and I'm not asking for any help there. It bothers me that we would accept any risk at all, I guess, at this point. It seems to me that we're promoting our downtown over all other areas at no cost, at any cost that's out there, right? And that's the overall theme that bothers me here, and it bothers my constituents. I guess if it was almost a guaranteed rate of return, and we were only using revenue bonds, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with it. But I've got a lot of ifs, and I don't think that we've satisfied much of or any of those at this point. Thank you.
And just to clarify, I do believe that every hotel conference center in Bloomington Normal had public-private participation. Doubletree had subsidies, Chateau did, and obviously Uptown. But Alderman Millawambwe and then Black.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I have two questions, so when I'm done with my first, don't sit down. Okay. The first question I
Get
have...
my exercise by going back and forth.
There you go. Exercise is good. The first question I have, and I think either you or Jeff could address that question, but has to do with land acquisition costs. And I think you've alluded to it in your report that it was 3 times as high as the fair market value. So what I'm curious about is whether or not there's room for movement there. Because I think that's, a pretty significant concern for people in the community, for pieces of property that have not been improved over the years.
I think it's 3 times assessor's market value, which is sometimes pretty accurate, sometimes not. But it certainly is more than people are expecting and believing that property it should be worth. So the seller, the owner of the land selling it, is trying to capture back some of the redevelopment value which they are not creating by their action. And there are a limited number of potential tools to use in this situation, and it is not an uncommon situation in redevelopment projects. So fully private, as occasionally you get in the biggest cities like Chicago, we have quite a bit of fully private redevelopment. But we had also a lot of redevelopment where there were conundrums about the land and consternation about the land prices and the land prices being pushed up. In Milwaukee, one of the gentlemen who just recently retired, who was in charge of economic development in these deals for the city, quipped that without TIF there was no land value in downtown Milwaukee. So it's telling you that the practice, whether we like it or not, has ended up being that there's a dynamic negotiating tension between the public desire to have a project and have something happen, and the landowner tries to take advantage of that, which I think is what's partly going on here. Appraisal will help us know the extent to which that is the case, because the assessor's market value is theoretically is supposed to be on, but it often is not really on commercial properties that are involved in this kind of situation. So that would be helpful. How much we can push back to retrade the land. We push that all the time, because that's just one of the factors when in this kind of situation. How successful we are is a question, and there are some tools and some legal tools that you can use to try to push that. But I don't know that I don't want to predict how far the city would be able to go, willing to go, and it's just going to be one of the elements that has to be negotiated hard.
Okay, thank you. And the other question had to do with the market study. I think that David was suggesting as far as HVS and the number of potential conferences that we could get into the area. Now, I know it's one thing. So far, what I've heard is more anecdotal information about, what could be done. But is there a way for us to have more solid information? Not only that, because we could determine, that yes, there is a market, but then somebody also has to go out and do the work to bring those in. So that's what I'd like to have an explanation about, who would actually, because so far I haven't seen anything that tells me these are the kind of conferences we can go after, and we are actually going to go after those conferences pretty hard to bring them into town.
So there are a couple things that I think can happen as the project, if the project progresses, and moves forward. The city could, at its cost, ask HVS to update on the hotel side, and I think that at some point we will want to see that from somebody. And it could also ask for a further study of the conferencing potential of a hotel at this site and the program. It could also ask the Coliseum to participate, and maybe it's only one pocket to the other pocket, but still to participate in an analysis and a study to try to figure out with the hotel what other bookings they might be able to do, and to make sure they're looking comprehensively at their booking potential. And that's the kind of thing that is in HVS's ken to do, that kind of work as well.
I just wanted to point out that we have Crystal Howard from the Convention Visitors Bureau, who has been, it's more maybe anecdotal evidence, but she's actually in the audience,
Right.
and might be able to work with us on that.
Sure, and that would be part of it as well, and that also can be, it is, I think, a legitimate use of any of the hotel motel taxes that might not otherwise flow into the general fund, but I think yours all flow into your general fund or not, but yeah, so they do. So it's all one pocket to the other. The other thing is that when the developer, if this moves forward, is going forward for financing commitments and the franchising agreement, they're going to have their own market studies that will address specifically the hotel and the conference facilities in the hotel. Those could then be reviewed by the city and the city's consultants at probably less cost than the cost of doing them from the city side. So there are some other checks and balances as the project progresses. I think the part of the decision is do we know enough now that there is potential for this to be successful to encourage going forward, because there is significant amount of effort to be undertaken by BDRP in order to try to bring this forward to the next level where we really have a project that we can review, and we have committed partners and committed parties. So I think you're not going to know everything today. Do you know enough to feel that this can be successful, that it can be successful if done properly, and can have a very positive impact on the downtown. And downtowns are in brownfield or in redevelopment situations, there are extraordinary costs that are driving this. There's structured parking in order to achieve the density and intensity that creates a walking environment, which is what creates a lot of the positive dynamics that are involved in a downtown that make it attractive, that help to make it basically the center of the community, the pride of the community, a place that people identify with as part of the community. And it's why communities do it. It's partly dollars and cents, but it's also partly emotion. That they want to have a downtown. I was noticing upstairs the McLean County Economic Development or profile of McLean County. The picture on the cover is downtown Normal. It's not. It's the circle in downtown Normal. It's not It's not part of Veterans Parkway, and that's part of why communities do this, to create that sense of community as well. But so the additional questions will be should be answered as you proceed. In terms of who's responsible, the 12,000 square feet in the hotel and the revenues that they need to make that make sense are their responsibility, and so they will be marketing that. They will undoubtedly do it in conjunction with the Coliseum and the Convention Visitors Bureau, so they can get some collaborative marketing and greater impact. But the private sector will have that responsibility if this project is done in the way it's proposed.
Alderman Black.
Thank you. Thank you. You can actually have a seat. Is there a way to pull up the conceptual drawing again on the PowerPoint? Thank you. And while Austin's doing that, I want to thank everybody for coming this evening who's spoken. I know there's been a lot of back-end work on this, very detailed, analytical. And to me, one of the challenges of tonight's meeting is that we are digging into numbers, and numbers don't get people excited. And so I wanted to pull this back up here. Looking at these tables, I can... my dad's an accountant, so I...
Hey, speak for yourself. Numbers get me excited.
Yeah, okay. So... Yeah. What I would say is, to me, tonight is a high-level discussion about is everything numbers-wise adding up to the way that we want it to. We've seen some movement in the projections, and I can quibble with an ADR of 129 or 150. I mean, that to me is not my focus this evening. And I always love hearing Kathy talk, because I think you kind of think the way that I do, because very list-oriented, and is the financing there? And we don't have the final deal in front of us. There's still some variables to work out. I don't think anybody questions that. So in terms of questions, I'll probably have some more feedback, maybe not, when we get to our process, the next steps. And I know that we're going to be reserving some time for staff at the end of that conversation. But I'll say publicly kind of what I've sent via email a couple different times is I see a lot of different groups represented here this evening. I see labor, I see the CVB, I saw the chamber, I see Downtown Bloomington Association. I had a laundry list. I see Greg Coos, I think I saw back there, McLean County History. There are a lot of groups and entities that would be impacted by such a project, and I would be very interested to hear some feedback about those. Not tonight, not going to put you on the spot to come up here, but as we move forward, and it sounds like an inducement resolution might have been the way to go, I'd love to hear those groups weigh in, because to me, what I'm seeing here is an exciting opportunity for Bloomington. Yes, there's risk involved, but I get a number of phone calls across the spectrum of this from people who are saying, don't do this is a horrible idea, it's just like the Coliseum. I guess I can see how one would think that, but I think these are two separate things entirely. Namely the piece about the private entity owning the land, it's not a city function, all of that sort of thing. But you look here, and this would be completely transformative. And the questions I guess I have are more for us, and the questions that we have to answer, which would be, if you're for this project, how do you answer the questions of what happens if the project doesn't materialize the way that we want it to? What happens if the occupancy rate isn't where it's at? What happens if the restaurant taxes don't come in? What happens if the 1% isn't going where we projected? And that's a question those who support such a project have to answer. And those who oppose it, I would say you have to answer the question, what is the cost of doing nothing? what is the cost of continuing to look at that building the way that it is, and how do you justify that cost? Because there is a cost. I mean, it's, whenever I have people that will come visit me in Bloomington, I take them downtown, and we go to Anjou, Reality Bites, Jazz Up Front. And these are great places, but this would be another opportunity for us to have a new centerpiece. And it was kind of alluded to in Steve's comments earlier about how you look at the EDC website and you see Uptown Normal being featured. We have a lot of beautiful areas in downtown Bloomington, across Bloomington. I don't think we're favoring one area or another. I think that this is just a real centerpiece and a signature for our community. And I have this image in my mind of, maybe 5 years from now, say that we move forward, it gets built, of someone coming to our community for, say, a concert or a convention or whatever, and they come out on a Saturday morning and they see the farmer's market. I mean, everyone agrees that's an asset to our community, but what a highlight to be showing people who are coming here. It's tough in Illinois. We have to fight against the state. We talk about, being an advantage. There were so many comments about how the state of Illinois makes it really difficult for people to want to come in here and invest in our community. And it's because of the uncertainty. And we have to fight against that. And is this risk unreasonable? I think that from where I sit at this point in time, I'm not seeing an unreasonable risk. I mean, we'll look at some of the more detailed proposals, final deal. I know we've talked about that structure-wise, but I think it's important that people weigh in. And I would argue, I wasn't here during the time of the Coliseum. I didn't live in the community. And I would argue that a lot of the consternation about that building was people didn't feel that their voices were heard in that conversation. And so to that end, I think this should be an entirely open process. Here we are in a public meeting discussing it, just preliminarily, conceptually. You'll probably see an inducement resolution at some point in the future public meetings. We want to hear what people have to say. And from where I sit, I believe in Bloomington. I think Bloomington and downtown Bloomington is a real asset to our city, our region, and our state. We have things here and amenities here that you're not going to find anywhere else. And I think I just can't imagine a world in which people wouldn't want to go to a restaurant there. I mean, these are people who are, will come back to me and say, we don't need a hotel. I would never stay there. Yeah, you're not going to stay in a hotel in Bloomington if you live in Bloomington. That makes sense to me. But you might have dinner at a restaurant there. I am downtown every weekend. I spend money there. That's tax revenue that we're generating. So these are the things that I think it seems sound. We've had a third party come in here, look at some of the numbers. We're not taking everything that Jeff is saying as golden, and we're being thoughtful. We're being open. We're being transparent. We want to hear people's feedback. So I guess the questions I would have is I hope that, my email, and I don't know if maybe Nora can speak to posting that up on the website. Some of the questions that I had, that's really what I have at this time. They're still kind of out there. Number one of them being, I'd love to see some narratives. I mean, we've really looked at some numbers here. I'd love to see some narratives of projects that have been successful with very similar structures and ones that have not been successful and why. I think that really helps kind of illustrate to people, what we're looking at. Because if someone calls me up and says, I don't like this idea, and I send them this pro forma analysis, I'm not sure that answers their question, but I would like to do a better job with some other examples that are out there. So that's where I stand right now. We'll see what the process the staff comes up with after that, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. It's also one of the reasons why Alderman Fruin and Howman and I, we went to Champaign. It was shockingly similar, not just in terms of the size and all the other similarities, but in terms of having an old dilapidated building that had been the largest fire hazard in downtown. And of course, then they had an action because it burned down. Yeah. And that produced the incentive.
Sure. And I forgot to mention before, if you'll allow me here, the one piece that I am disappointed about is I like that rooftop bar. I think that is really key. And everybody who I talk to that is in my age bracket thinks that is a real signature piece that would look wonderful in downtown, and it is lacking. So hope that comes back.
You'd be able to see all the mountains and rivers.
There you go.
Okay. On that, Alderman Sage, I'm sorry.
Just a couple questions. And first, I think there's probably probably an opportunity for the Scott Black Bayou Bar up on top of the, if you wanted to, jump in on that, man.
I'll look into
it. From a process perspective, because I guess I'm wondering, I have a couple of other questions, but I want to know, will we be talking about this again? Or is this the time where we talk about things like process, as Scott has suggested?
What I think, as I understood it, Mr. Friedman had recommended a process for us to go forward, and I think that would also include, not inconsistent with what Alderman Black had suggested, that we would have an open meeting at some point when we've got I believe the city manager suggested this, I thought was a great idea. When we know very specifically what it is that we have, then we have open dialogue, maybe, BCPA or someplace that can house this.
So along that line, I guess I'm wondering when I think about how the town of Normal approached some of their uptown development. I know when it came to hotel, I think they actually went to referendum on that. And is that the kind of public feedback opportunity? I mean, it seems to be we should at least have a conversation about whether or not we're going to do that, whether that's appropriate for us to do. That seems to me to be a very quantitative approach to public feedback.
The referendum in Normal was against a public-owned. They were going to buy the hotel. And ultimately what they did is then they circled back around and they had a private investor build the hotel.
My point is that whether it's the hotel in Uptown Normal or the Coliseum, there is some history, some precedent for offering a referendum to get widespread feedback from the community on it. That's my main point.
Okay. And Mr. Hales, I guess we'll turn to the staff and the next steps. And I guess the incentive or not incentive, the opinion of the council to pursue an inducement resolution or what we would do.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me first just make a few other comments. We've heard tonight and we've read comments about this concept, this project could be a pioneering project in downtown, transformative. It can be catalytic. And when you think of a $50 million investment, I hope everyone is excited like I am, because these types of projects, however they come to us, whether they're like Normal that kind of started out buying land, went through the RFP, RFQ process, or, we're having a project proposal brought to us tonight. I think it's exciting that something of this magnitude is before us tonight, something for us to consider and to have a dialogue with the community. I think as we kind of talk about next steps, I also want to draw a distinction between concept plan and the final plan. And as indicated by Mr. Friedman, we don't have a lot of the facts. We don't have a lot of the final details. So I think there is an important distinction to be made about if we do come up with a process and we come up with a detailed process on engaging the citizens, the property owners, all these groups, I think there's two distinct opportunities to do that. One is at the concept stage, where we are right now. And that concept stage, we got to keep in mind though, is at a very high level. We're talking about vision. We're talking about, what we want to see happen downtown. We're going to talk about is this something that is worthy of the city continuing to put a lot of time and effort and money into just a process to bring forward a final development agreement, something that ultimately would be subject to final public hearing and council involvement. And we've got to be careful, we can't mix the two, because right now at the concept stage, as indicated, we can't give a lot of answers to what I think the public also wants to know. How is it going to be financed? What is going to be the specific public participation? What's going to be the ultimate risk? So many of those questions cannot be answered at this time, but we can have a dialogue on these higher level conceptual ideas and so forth. But as the mayor said, I think if the council were to ultimately give their approval for staff and the developer to move forward, then we need a time to work through those details, kind of behind the scenes, as any typical negotiation between private parties and the city. And then when we bring back a final project that would include, working within the parameters the council establish, if that's within those parameters, we come back and then you have a final deal with facts and all the information we have for kind of a final vote or final public hearing or final outreach and input for those who support or those who do not. What I'd like to do at this point is ask Jeff Jurgens to come forward, because we've got two things here. Let me first say that as recommended, I do believe that adoption by the city council of an inducement resolution that would be a exciting next step for the city to take. We will not get to the point of being answer these questions unless we put in a lot of this additional time and effort. Adoption of the inducement resolution together with the specifics we put in there will help frame, what is our next step to get to this end stage of having a final definitive agreement. Now, in that inducement resolution, we didn't prepare that for tonight. We thought after tonight there's a time for the council to consider. But we also need to know, the promoter needs to know, is the council serious on the concept? Is the council serious that down the road, is this truly going to be a public-private partnership? Is the council serious that a lot of staff time, a lot of developer promoters' time can and should be spent to bring back to you a detailed project within your parameters and within what you are comfortable in? No one, either Mr. Gablehausen or the city, now I don't know about the consultants, they might be, but no one wants to go through a long process and to have you ultimately say, even though this is what we were liked and conceptually approved on a concept, to turn down something that could take, as indicated, 3 to 4 more months with a lot. We've got a lot on our plate. And I think the inducement resolution and the vote on that is going to be a significant telling point as whether or not the majority wants us to proceed or not. But I also think the inducement resolution is going to be a subject to a lot of discussion and debate of the council, because you're going to have to, from a policy standpoint, indicate what that timeline is, what are going to be the steps. We could even work up some narratives on communication plan at the concept stage, at the final stage. But when we go to that vote, which cannot be held tonight, I think that's going to be where I think we are all going to look, what direction do you want to give us? What direction do you want to give to Mr. Gablehausen and hopefully this ultimate hotelier and others, should they spend time and effort? And is there a likelihood that there is support for a possible final agreement within the parameters we talk about? Mr.
Hales, if I could, so essentially after Mr. Juergen speaks, what you're asking from us is just kind of an informal, should staff go ahead and prepare an inducement resolution at some point to be presented to the council?
And that, exactly.
For an actual action.
And that's what, as Mr. Juergens will go over, what we have worked something, because typically what we sometimes see is that we're looking for some high-level direction tonight, but we're trying to kind of focus your remarks in an area that is going to be right on and focused on a very appropriate next step, i.e. the inducement resolution. So, Jeff, would you take a few minutes and kind of go over what we've prepared that we would like them to react to and give us kind of some comments? It's not a vote, but is some general high-level direction.
Right. Thank you, Council and City Manager. As the City Manager said, basically what we're going to be looking for tonight is for the council to give the staff some direction. This obviously isn't a final action or anything, but we are looking for direction. Assuming based on some of the comments we've heard tonight, we've obviously heard, some people, in favor of continuing with the project, some people potentially not in favor of continuing with the project. What we would like to know is, in listening to all of the aldermen, do you have a desire for us to come back with that inducement resolution? Will not be difficult to prepare. We'll probably come back in March with that. At the same time, we'd also be coming back with documents to basically start the TIF process, whether or not it's on this project or another downtown project, and whether or not it continues to fruition, we would at least need to get that process started as well. So basically, the way that this process would proceed would be, if does seem like there's kind of a majority support to at least bring this inducement resolution for a vote and have a debate on it and decide whether or not this is the final, direction that you want to go, then we'll listen to that tonight and we'll bring that back at a meeting in March. Just a key note here is that the inducement resolution is not binding on you. It's not a final determination that you're definitely going to enter into an agreement or pursue it, approve a development agreement. It's simply saying that what's been presented is of interest. It's potentially, if it works out with the risk and with the other facts that come to light, that, there is some interest on behalf of the council, depending on everything that you find out in this interim period that's going to take many months to work out. But this is the first step in starting that process.
Okay. All right.
So, Mayor, just,
Please.
so Jeff, help me understand. What new information will be framed or put into context in the inducement resolution, but above and beyond what we've heard to this point? I'm trying to understand kind of what's the output or the deliverable, if you will, coming out of the inducement.
Just what you said. The inducement resolution will give a specific time limit and a list of deliverables.
Okay.
It will, however, require the city council to also to encourage a developer to go through that process and with the deliverables to start the TIF and the BDD process, because if it works, we've got to do it simultaneously. And what we're hoping is that where we have a list of specific deliverables that we've conceived of the deliverables, we've made the list, this is what we want to see. Because the bottom line in all of this is, how can you look at that and not think it's a beautiful, beautiful project? But the issue is the risk level. And as we've all said, is we have to determine risk versus reward, this being the reward. We need more facts and more specifics. So that's what an inducement resolution would be. There would be a time limit on it. There would be a definite time limit so that you as a city council, enough of expenses with consultants and whatever, either, can you give this city council this specific information that we would need to proceed. With that information, okay, once you have that information, then you might start the discussions that you may want with the citizens of the town, because you'll know exactly what you're being asked to do and what the proposed product you're going to receive.
Okay, at this point, if I could, I'm sorry, further questions, Mr. Alderman Black.
Thank you, and thank you, Jeff. You can sit down. So I think I'm seeing some heads nodding here that this is the way that we want to go, which I think is the best way, whether you're in support or against, because if you're opposed, this would be an opportunity to potentially end the project. But at that meeting, Dave Sage asked about additional information. I would love to see us, and maybe Nora can do this, sorry Nora, try to reach out to those groups, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some, maybe downtown bar owners too, people who are willing to submit feedback, for us to review at the conceptual level, because we're being asked conceptually about the idea. It seems reasonable to me to ask other groups who'd be impacted by such a project to weigh in conceptually as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask very quickly at this point, it's just, are you in favor of moving ahead with an inducement resolution or not?
Mayor.
And, I'm sorry, Alderman Owamboy.
What about, I thought we had moved the public comment to the end so we could hear from citizens. So should we?
We can do that either, whatever your preference is. I interpret that to be, we'd finish our discussion. I mean, we're not voting tonight. It's just what our thoughts are. And then the last thing I understood was public comment at the end.
Yeah.
But
that's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, to me, I mean, I would want to hear from people before, I make a decision. So.
Okay, we're going to hear, we're just to be clear, you're not voting tonight, just whether or not you want to move forward. The vote on the inducement resolution.
Yeah, no, it would just be something else to consider. That's all.
Okay.
But if the consensus is no,
if you want me to have the, call people with public comment, I think we would need to have it. Okay, so I think what do we need to do? We need to have just another motion, or can I just as chair? Go ahead, and did you have, Mr. Alderman Lauer, do you want to say something?
No, you covered it, thanks.
Oh, okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with Josh Smidgall. Oh, yeah, if you can come afterwards so we can do this expeditiously. You have up to 3 minutes. Then we have Don Shields, William Boquist, and Alton Franklin.
How's it going?
Do we have the timer on? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Hey everyone, this is Fistbump from Ian Bain's morning show on News Talk 98.3. Ian was telling me that he was concerned that she didn't know that he had left Cities 92.9 and is now on News Talk 98.3. Ian also told me to tell you, the Bloomington City Council, that he's now representing the Bloomington Downtown Redevelopment Partners, LLC. Since the BDRP has not filed anywhere, Ian says he went ahead and filed, and he knew that you'd be excited about it. Many of you know that Ian is also a real estate broker. So he wanted me to tell you two things. First, that he's going to turn down the deal that you want to do for the hotel. And second, to tell you to tune in tomorrow morning on Ian Bain's morning show on News Talk 98.3. Also, since the LLC doesn't have to identify itself to present something to the City Council, why do we have to give our names to the City Council? Thank you.
Don Shields, William Boquist, and then Alton Franklin.
Mayor, members of the council, good evening. I'd like to speak in support of and also in opposition to this project. Kind of a conundrum. In support of, because as a former retired union electrician, I'm very happy to see this go forward. There's a lot of people that's out of work, and this would be a great thing for them. Hopefully, the developer builds a union. Good. In opposition, it was a nice PowerPoint presentation. I think it covered a lot of facts. There was a couple of things that came up. Low to minimal risk. I would like to see the city of Bloomington have zero risk on this project. As far as funding, if it requires additional capitalization, I think that's up to the private developer. I don't want to see another Coliseum, ECPA, that was supposed to return much more money than it already is, and it seems to be a money pit. I don't want this to happen to this organization here. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, William Boquist, Alton Franklin, and then Aaron Halliday.
Just a couple of points. One of the aldermen here suggested that a referendum might be an appropriate step at some point in this process, and I heartily concur with that. I believe that the referendum that was conducted at the time that the Coliseum was built showed that the public was significantly at odds with where the council ended up going, and I think in hindsight the public was more right than wrong on that. Also, with respect to the architectural rendering here, not disparaging anybody in the room, but I've seen much better looking buildings. To me, if I was driving into town for the first time and that's what I saw, I wouldn't be bowled over by what an attractive place it is. Thanks.
Okay. Alton Franklin, Aaron Halliday, and Gary Lambert.
Good evening, everyone. I think I've made my feelings known about this before, but just so the interests of, number one, it's good that you used a proposed view, because if you actually show what Madison Street looks like right now, it might show the developer what our infrastructure really looks like, and pretty much sucks. Little history, I was a military brat for 27 years, 17 years courtesy of my father, 10 years courtesy of myself. During that time, I traveled around, saw quite a bit of the world, met a lot of amazing people. I'll tell you right now, one of the things that my grandfather, God rest his soul, told me rings truer than ever before. A place is just a place. It's the people that count. And in Bloomington, I have found my home. And believe me, folks, I am going to fight tooth and nail anybody and anything that threatens the welfare of those folks and that sticks their hands into their pockets more than is appropriate. Quite frankly, this is just stupid. You've got a developer facilitator here who basically came out with swags. The numbers don't come even close to what Mr. Friedman's group, and I'll at least acknowledge their scientific principle and congratulate you on an effort well done. And by the way, I just love incisive people, and what you said was spot on target. Where's the money? It's not in my pocket. It's not in my fellow citizens' pocket. Let it go. It's not worth it. We don't need a renter ruin to go with the Markowitz Mausoleum, okay? Simply put, we've got what we need right now, and we need to build that back to where it's good. Jim Karch has done a remarkable job with the infrastructure. I think he could use that $8 to $13 million a hell of a lot better than any developer ever could. And quite honestly, I did a little bit of number crunching of my own. I'm somewhat of a fan of math. Integral calc and diff calc and a lot of different other forms of mathematics are fun to me. Basic accounting, not so much, but it's intriguing when I find the numbers. You know, when that occupancy drops below 55%, that we're going to be in the hole, right? I suggest you crunch the numbers and check me out on that. Please, tell me if I'm wrong. But it doesn't matter. Simply put, 129 rooms with 250 parking spaces goes beyond ignorant. It goes all the way into perfectly stupid. We do not need it. There's no reason to continue pursuing this freaking pie in the sky.
Aaron Halliday, and then Gary Lambert.
Really hard to close for Alton, so give me a couple seconds. But I'm Aaron Halliday. I own Checker Cab and Yellow Cab here in Bloomington. And I'm a stakeholder in the city of Bloomington in two different aspects. One, I'm a homeowner. That's secondary, believe it or not, primarily because my business is here, first of all. So that's the primary reason why I'm here tonight. And with the technology that's available today, I don't have to live in Bloomington to own a cab company in Bloomington. I could live in Belize. I'm looking at it. I could live in the Philippines. My wife's looking at it. And so the fact that I'm a stakeholder, I've been looking at this stuff, and I found a book called Convention Center Follies by Haywood Sanders. And in just the brief reading that I've done with this, all over the United States, cities are building convention centers and hotels and all that kind of stuff, convention centers, and they're not needed. And I don't believe this is needed here. Alderman Black mentioned what it affects different companies. It'll affect my company. The Coliseum affects my company. We're busy when there's an event in town once a month, once every 6 months. It's not very frequent. But when there's a concert in town, we're busy from an hour and a half before the show starts, and then we're busy when the show is over. And of course, we're already busy when the show is over. So will it pay to have enough cabs in this town during an event? No, it doesn't. And that's why we have Uber. I guess that's the solution, is Uber. So I don't think the city needs this. I don't agree with it at all. The stakeholders need to speak their minds, and I think that this is pretty much a scam, that we're just throwing good money after bad, and I would like to see zero risk from the citizens. The taxpayers shouldn't be on the hook for this, and I truly believe that the way things are going to go, that the citizens will be held for it. And I like some of you I don't know. I can't say I don't like any of you, but I sure wouldn't want you guys to have the reputation that Mayor Markowitz has in the community, because a lot of people call it the Judy Dome and all that kind of stuff. So, and then one other thing that just bugs me. Green Top's not going to happen, so I don't think you should just keep promoting it, because I don't see it ever happening. Thank you.
Okay, Gary Lambert.
Good evening. Just a quick comment. Mr. Black, you mentioned getting together with a bunch of the affected groups, and that's a great idea. One of the other affected groups, though, is the citizens of Bloomington. Please include them. Mr. Sage, I'll buy you dinner anywhere in Bloomington if you ever see a binding referendum on this. I was old enough, I did attend the meetings for BCPA roughly 15 years ago. Couple things in common with that presentation and a portion of tonight's and even last June. For those, there was nothing but sunshine and roses. Everything was marvelous. One thing I noted that was in common is LLCs were involved in both. Limited liability. In both cases, they said, the citizens will not be impacted. We heard that again tonight. I'd like to praise Friedman and Kathy, I think it was, for adding a little sanity. No, a lot of sanity. There is risk involved. I hope you all understand that. I was disappointed that a couple of councilmen didn't even ask a question. That's neither here nor there. I'll be quick tonight. I hate to use paper, but I want to read a quick quote from Thomas Sowell. He's an economist, a senior fellow at Hoover Institution, Stanford University. How long do politicians have to keep on promising heaven and delivering hell before people catch on and stop getting swept away by rhetoric? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just, we're just about, oh, yes, Mr. Juergens?
Do you have more public comment?
No.
I was just going to say again, for the record on the next steps of this, what we would like the council to do is essentially provide, what they think the next direction should be. We're not asking you to say that you would or you would not support an inducement resolution. The idea of an inducement resolution and bringing that up for a vote at a future meeting is simply the way that we will be able to tell whether or not you want us to continue moving forward with this. So if tonight, when you're talking about it, if we don't hear a lot of support for that, then it might be the kind of thing that we don't bring it back. But if people are generally in favor of it, then again, that's something we'll be bringing back in March. So.
Okay. Yeah, and just to clarify a couple things, we don't go, I'm not with you, Mr. Juergens,
Jeff,
but, I'm sorry, yeah.
I've got one question
sure.
before we do this.
Okay.
I think it's fair to ask, and I'm not being critical, but how much is it going to cost us from the legal standpoint to actually develop this TIF and this inducement that you're talking about? I think the inducement resolution is fairly nominal and is fairly standard language. I don't think that's going to be an issue. I'd have to defer to Kathy on the TIF.
We would probably have to get some quotes on the TIF, but quite frankly, if you decide that this is not the project that the city council chooses to go forward, TIFing the area, I think, does send a message to Jeff Gablehausen or anyone else, come on down. We are prepared to create a public-private partnership because of the TIF. A TIF is 23 years. I think that would give you a next 2 to 3 years to really go forward with the project. I think it would be a wise investment for the city.
Cost?
The cost can be anywhere from $25,000 to $45,000.
Thank you. But that's not the initial cost to come back with the paperwork. That would be from basically beginning to end. Is that right, Kathy?
Right.
Actually creating the TIF.
Okay. And just to clarify, we don't want to necessarily go back and forth, and when people come up to public comment, we don't have a conversation. If you want conversations, you can come back, on Friday evenings for my mayoral open house from 4:30 to 5:30. We sit right back there where Crystal Howard is right now along the fishbowl and chat. But just to say a couple things, I didn't hear this evening any pie in the sky. I don't think we're talking about false promises at all. I think what we heard was evidence, and I think we need to make a decision based on data-driven decision. We also, the mention was made $13 million could be put in streets. That $13 million isn't there, Alton. It's not there. If we don't have this investment, there is no $13 million. So there's a very clear misunderstanding with that. In terms of a referendum, the two projects where the city was going to, either in Bloomington or in Normal, own and operate something, there was an advisory referendum. You can't have a binding referendum in Illinois. Obviously, that's Illinois state law. But anyway, that's also not how economic development projects work. Every time you go back, you can't say, hey, we want permission to have somebody spend $50 million in our downtown. That's what elected officials are supposed to do: vet the information, go through the numbers, analyze it, evaluate it, and make a decision. And so that's all I'm going to say. At this point, what I would ask, I think you're asking for simple direction, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Hales, just should we move forward with the inducement resolution?
Yes.
Or not?
Yes.
I think, so that's fairly, Alderwoman Howman, I'll start with you. Okay. Alderman Black?
Yes.
Alderwoman Schmidt?
Yes, please.
Alderwoman Painter?
Yes.
Alderwoman Burgess? Alderman Miller-Wambwe? Alderman Sage?
Cautiously, yes.
Okay. Alderman Lauer?
No, not that it matters now, but, no.
Okay. Alrighty. Okay, thank you very much. At this point, thank you, everybody, and Mr. Friedman and Associates and Kathy Orr. You've done an outstanding job giving us information and really good data to make a really important decision. And thank you, Mr. Gablehausen, too,
Mayor?
for all your energy. Could I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by multiple people. Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt, second by Alderman Black. All in favor signify by saying aye. 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 We're adjourned.
I don't know if I was
Well, I like it.
I saw you.
And they play next